Hey, everybody, we're super excited to be back this week because we have a very special guest speaker on this week's episode of A New Era of Dentistry. We have Dilaine Gloege with us today. Many of you have probably seen her, heard her name, whether it's speaking or in content. She is one of my favorite people in the world to talk to if you want to nerd out on coding, because I know she knows her stuff. So, Dilaine is joining us. She is actually a dental speaker, author, educator, and consultant through Tidewater Dental Consulting. She is also certified through the AAPC in medical coding and is a dental coding expert, which there aren't very many of those out there. And she contributed to the book Coding with Confidence, written by the late Charles Blair, which we all know and respect. I've always had a copy of that on my desk. And why is she joining us today, you're wondering? Well, we need to talk about something very, very important, which is inappropriate billing practices when it comes to dental billing to insurance. This can lead to legal issues and otherwise. And we're not here as expert legal representatives to give you our opinion, but we are here to tell you what you should and should not do and why. We're going to cover a few different things today, such as temporary doctors filling in, what happens when you buy and or sell a practice and providers aren't credentialed, what happens when you bring in a new associate and they aren't credentialed, what the heck is locum tenens, and when should you or should you not use it. So I'm just going to actually hand it on over to Dilaine to get us started.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. It's wonderful to be here with you and Ashley today. This is my favorite topic. So, coding and billing and proper coding and billing is my favorite topic. And yes, there's a lot of topics we could choose, and this one today is a really good one. There's a lot of confusion. And when we talk about, when we mention the word fraud, so that's a very broad term, right? Um, well, I am not a judge or a jury. So, therefore, those are the only two people who can determine if an act is fraud. But what we can talk about is what are some of the billing practices that are lurking in our practices and in dentistry as a whole that we can avoid to keep from falling into the trap of an investigation of a potentially fraudulent billing practice. And what does that look like? So, that's what we're here to talk about today from a risk management perspective. And we know what's going on in the industry, and we see some of these claims, and it is very concerning. So, great topic today. Thank you for having me.
Well, and I love too that you call it the inappropriate billing and not necessarily just write out fraud, which for us, it is so insightful that how can we share with practices just inappropriate billing that we're seeing on our side, especially, a billing company, we see a lot of these things done in dental practices, and we want to help them and we want to help educate them. So we're so excited to have you on so we can share with everybody just what we're seeing on our end and then get your advice because you are the expert in this. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you.
I would love to start with um, for us, the when a doctor buys a practice. So we see this a lot when a doctor buys a practice and there's that transition period, or even if an associate comes on and the doctor might not be credentialed. Could you tell us on your end what do you see? What do you recommend for doctors that are in the midst of purchasing a practice, joining a practice, and they're not quite credentialed? What should they do?
That's a great question, and it's one that I hear often. And it's one that unfortunately I have seen some investigations into insurance fraud investigation, insurance claim form fraud investigation, actually. A few years ago, probably 4 or 5 years ago, but it's not the only time I've seen it. I get a panicked call from a doctor. Oh my goodness, my state board is investigating insurance claim form fraud. against me. And he said to me, he said, I had no idea that what they are investigating was actually part of an insurance claim fraud consideration. He said to me, I only thought that when we talk about submitting a false claim, that it meant that I could not submit any service that I did not provide. And so that led to a discussion of his challenge. And he had been, he was being investigated by a state dental board. A complaint had been filed. This doctor had been on vacation 2 different weeks. And each of those 2 weeks, he hired what is known as a locum tenens. So, a locum tenens provider is a provider who steps in the absence of your regular doctor to either perform treatment, or a lot of times it's just a licensed dentist who has to be present in the office so that the hygienist can continue and keep the hygiene schedule going and see those patients. So, whether they're actually performing dental treatment, performing hygiene exams, or just present in the office, they're the doctor who is either supervising the hygiene services or performed the services listed on the claim. And that doctor is required to be listed as the treating provider with their state license number and NPI type 1 number, regardless of the circumstance. Otherwise, it's misrepresenting, it's misrepresentation of the treatment and who provided it. It also has to be documented in the chart note who provided and supervised those services. So, with this particular doctor, there was a complaint filed, and the state board says, "No, you can't do that." And I said, "What is it they're saying that you did? What was the accusation?" Basically, he was out of the country on vacation both of those weeks, and on all claims that went out, he was listed as a treating doctor, including hygiene services and all emergency treatment that was provided. And that is an inappropriate billing pattern. That did not end too well for this doctor. He was disciplined by his state board for that practice. So, regardless of the circumstance, if there is a doctor filling in for you, or you have sold your practice, or have a new associate that's not credentialed, you have to report the treating doctor accurately. So, how does this happen when you sell a practice? What we see is in these sale transition contracts, it'll state for 6 months, I, the owner, current owner, or seller, agree to give you permission in writing to use my name, my license number, and NPI to report on the claim form for up to 6 months during the transition period. There's even a letter that floats around that says, I give you permission to do this. But that's not how payers look at it. That's not how the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare services look at it, unfortunately. And it matters what the payers think. Either way, it results in a potentially false claim. And it can result in the provider receiving reimbursement he or she is not entitled. That is problematic. So, regardless of what your transition contract states in that sale of the practice, know that you're required to report accurately on the claim. So that's one way it happens, and that's one example of just a simple complaint to the state dental board, and it's not known where that complaint came from, but he thinks it was a patient. So we have very savvy patients.
Mm-hmm.
And if you haven't met yours yet, stay tuned because they're lurking in all of our practices. And even the state board can investigate.
Oh yeah, especially, if they get a bill that they might not be happy with, like, "Ooh, how can I who can I reach out to maybe look into this further?" So, yeah, it's very true that it's the patients and, your team, even your team. I've heard of, some employees that they're noticing what's going on. They don't want themselves to get in trouble. So they report it as well. So just make sure that once you know what you should and shouldn't do, from there, it's making the changes and just making sure that everything we're doing is above board.
And with employees, an employee can be held accountable too. Ultimately, it's the treating doctor who is ultimately held accountable. But any dental team member involved in that encounter or claim submission, including the one who presses send for that claim, they too can be held accountable. So, whenever you have knowledge of some sort of inappropriate billing practice, you should contact and follow the chain of command in your practice, whoever that supervisor is. It could be the owner doctor, and you should express your concerns. And it is the hope that whoever you are to express your concerns to at the practice level will take that seriously and say to you, thank you so much for expressing this and bringing this to our attention. I assure you, we will do our part in investigating this to ensure that we're doing things in compliance. And then don't stop there. Make sure that you follow up with that team member. So that's a great point as well, Ashley. You mentioned also, what about the new associate who's not credentialed?
Right.
Same thing. That associate who provided those services and may have supervised the hygiene services, they're the ones who are listed as a treating doctor. Because if they're out of network, that patient may not have any out of network benefits. So if you report that the owner doctor provided those services, then you just received in network benefits that you were not entitled to receive. And it can be problematic.
Now, the biggest burning question I bet people are having right now is, first of all, we've always done it this way. If doctor's sick and it wasn't planned, or, sometimes there's just no time to credential a new provider, whomever has to keep the practice open so patients don't have to get rescheduled or whatever other reason. What do you do? What should they be doing? How does this work properly?
Great question. And that is a burning question I receive from team members all the time. So let's go back to the locum tenens. When your doctor is on vacation, most payers do not have a provision for a locum tenens for vacation. But some payers may have a provision in the instance of death of an owner doctor, or maybe an accident. And maybe this doctor, due to an accident, is going to be out for many months. A few have maternity benefits or provision for maternity, not benefits, but a few may have provision for maternity leave. You should always contact provider relations of the payer to inquire, even if you're out of network, because that matters as well. You should contact each payer, and you start with the ones you're in network with to ask, is there a provision for locum tenens for this circumstance? Some payers, it's a death certificate only. There is no other provision, period. Others may have some of the provisions we just discussed. So always contact the payer provider relations before you submit that first claim for your locum tenens. Now, when we talk about these new associates and the sale of practice, you can contact the payer and ask, but my experience has been there's no provision for that. They're going to require you to report the doctor who actually provided the treatment or supervised the treatment. And you can even find this information in your PPO contracts, processing policy manuals, dental handbooks, provider manuals, whatever that payer calls that manual, that's usually where you can find the information. And that's what you've agreed to. And that would violate your agreement there. As far as what do you do when that new associate comes on board during the credentialing process, you may consider, not scheduling any in-network patients with that new associate until that credentialing process is complete. And I want to approach this too while we're talking about that. I call them schemes because that's really what they are. I'll get this justification call from an owner doctor that says, well, my fee schedule's higher than my new associate. So I think with the hygiene services for the pro fee and the bite wings and the fluoride, I think it's okay to submit under my NPI and just the associate doctor when they do the exam. No, that's not a good scheme. And they're on to you. You're under the radar from payers on that. They will put two and two together that you submitted the claim for that data service for those hygiene services on one claim and the exam under a different doctor, and it was the same data service. That is on the radar, and it is being investigated as improper billing practice as well. So that's another thing that happens. So please don't do that. Report the associate doctor and know that even if you report the locum tenens or the associate doctor who's not credentialed, just understand that you may be receiving and be prepared to receive any out-of-network benefits that the patient may or may not have in their plan. So it's, those are some of the things you should do and some of the things that you should not do.
Well, and why do you think offices are so scared for it to be processed out of network? Because, it really comes down to the doctor that's there can still provide the work. It's just, it might be processed out of network. And what do you think that fear is that, oh no, we have to maybe do inappropriate billing so it's not processed out of network? It's not that we can't bill the insurance company. It's just that if we bill them the correct way, it might be processed out of network until they're credentialed.
I think sometimes it's, as far as the fear goes, it's losing that patient. But I also think the biggest problem is team members don't know how to have that conversation with the patient because you're required to make a good faith effort to collect any portion not paid by the patient's insurance plan. And they don't want to have that conversation. That's a courageous conversation. They don't have the skills, the conversation skills, in order to have that conversation with the patients. And they're afraid to upset the patient. They're afraid they're going to lose that patient.
That is so true. Yes, it is. Those are hard conversations, and we could have a whole topic on just those courageous conversations, especially when it comes to collecting money. I don't know why in the dental space it feels so icky sometimes, especially when you're first starting to collect money, when it's like you go to any doctor and you always expect to pay, or you go to the grocery store, you always expect to pay. It's not always, oh, can you bill me later? So it's, hopefully we can just change the culture of the dental practice that we don't have to be scared to ask for money for the procedures that the patients need.
I think it goes back to education. Educating the patient that dentistry and your dental treatment is not elective. It's not optional. It's part of taking care of our total health. And we've always had this fear of asking the patient to purchase a crown. And that's how we look at it, is we're asking them to purchase a crown that's $1,000. I know that's not a normal fee these days,
It
but
used to be.
it did
Yeah.
used to be. Instead, we need to be educating the patient on how this affects, or lack of treatment affects, their overall health. And then we need to change our language and our mindset to, we're asking them to invest in their overall health. It's an investment in themselves. And we in dentistry, we're nice people and we want to help people. That's why we chose this profession. But unfortunately, sometimes we treatment plan based on what we think the patient can afford.
Mm.
But if we educate and create that value and practice asking the patient to invest in themselves, then that fear goes away. But it takes practice.
Mm.
And I know I worked for a dentist for years, and he would do everything he could to keep from asking the patient to invest in the treatment they needed, because he thought, they can't afford
Mhm.
this. I just can't ask them. I said, how do you know they can't afford it? they're going to afford whatever you create the value and whatever they value. And he practiced hierodontics, so he could avoid asking them to invest in a crown. That's what he did, and that's what I call it, is hierodontics. We don't section roots and do hemisections anymore and save half that root with a root canal and a crown. That's hierodontics.
That is it is so true though, and I think it's a mindset sometimes of the dentist that then bleeds over to the team too. That I used to when I first started because I was 20, and so asking a patient for $2,000 in my head, I'm like, I can't afford that. That it
Right.
was hard for me to then ask money of that amount to from a patient. So I think it's shifting everybody's mindset, and it starts at the top, and that again, that is about the value. Like, it's not about the dollar sign. It's what value are we providing you, and this is for your health. This isn't just something off, Amazon that everyone's probably racking up their Amazon dollars. Like, this is for your whole health.
Absolutely. It is.
Yeah.
And that's it. The mindset's the
Mhm.
problem.
That makes me reference a previous two webinars we did with Brianne Clark at Pivotal Presentations, where she's helping give you that language that you need to present treatment plans and then later to overcome objections, that really centers on the goal is for our patients to get the appropriate oral care that they need. Not, I know you need to have a full schedule to keep your doors open, but ultimately we're all here to ensure our patients take care of themselves, and likewise we take care of them, whether it's clinical or admin. So that's what this is all about. So make sure you look at those. I also want to mention our next episode will be burnout, because that ties into what Ashley and Dilaine were just talking about, as far as not wanting to have the conversations, treatment planning things that maybe are lesser than what you should be doing. And it all ties into that. So be confident, make sure that you're educated and have the right conversations at the right times with your staff and your team, and everything's going to be okay. And we've all got your back. All three of us here today. You can email us at info@withwisdom.com to get to any of the three of us to ask for help. We'll get you connected. I also want to say, in full transparency, my gears were turning with the billing scheming. I have more questions for you, Dilaine, that I hope we can cover in our next webinar, including adjustments, kind of tying back to what Shelley at PPO Advisors told us with a credentialing mindset. I don't want to get into that today because I think we'll talk about that for a long time. But I know a lot of people are probably thinking, well, if a provider's out of network and I send the W-9, I can just honor the in-network fees. And I'm watching your face, and I know this is not probably a no-no. So stay tuned to join us for our next event with Dilaine. We'll release that soon, where we're going to get into more of the coding, billing, adjustment side. And I hope also at some point Medicare, because that's a big, big deal as well.
And I love Medicare, so I can't wait.
Well, I
I
mean,
love
those
talking
plans
Medicare.
are just everywhere now. And so I think, dental offices need to know how to bill for those plans because a lot of the generation that, my father's and those that it's become very popular plan. So we need to know how to use it in our practice. Before we do go, just, I'm a practical girly. So what would you say the number one tip for offices? So if you're having someone, if you know a planned vacation's coming out, call your payers, see if you can file the locum tenens, and then how do they file it? So if they get the permission to do it, where on the claim form, what information would they have to submit to the insurance company?
So, if by chance the payer does allow you to utilize the owner doctor um, name, license number, and NPI type 1, they would file that under treating provider. it's important to note too, Ashley, that the 2024 ADA dental claim form added a space that you can check that this is a locum tenens. So if you have permission, don't have permission to report it under the owner doctor, you should be checking that box, and you have to do that manually,
Mm-hmm.
because there again, you need to properly disclose everything about that locum tenens. Um, and there goes back to, I highly recommend that you listen to your previous podcast with Chili, because I'm sure she's going to address that credentialing
Mm-hmm.
piece of it in that podcast, because you can't just report a locum tenens who hasn't been associated with your tax ID and expect to get an immediate payment. Every payer has their processes, and I'm sure that she provided some great tips on how to do that.
Oh, yes. And then I know, where can people see you? I know you have an event coming up and with Brianne, who is on our podcast and webinar. I would love for you to share a little bit more about that, and where everyone can reach out to you if they have any questions.
So I'm super excited to team up with Brianne. She is absolutely amazing. She and I have teamed up to offer an all-day seminar in Hershey, Pennsylvania at the Hershey Lodge. And did I mention there's chocolate involved?
Sold.
Lots of chocolate.
Done.
So we're going to offer 4 CE credits. It is all day, and you get the 4 CE credits and chocolate. And we're going to talk about some of the common coding errors, some of these billing challenges that you guys face on a daily basis. And what can we do to solve these challenges? What are your pain points? Lots of Q&A. So we want you to bring the challenges. And then Brianne's going to tell us how to present those treatment plans, how to have these tough conversations with your patients. She is absolutely the most brilliant, amazing person in dentistry I have met in a really long time, as far as talking to your patients. And she's so soft spoken and just one of the sweetest, kindest humans ever. So I hope that you will consider joining Brianne and I on August 2nd in Hershey for our event called Sweeten Your Coding, Insurance, and Presentation Skills.
Oh, I love it. And did we mention there's chocolate?
Oh, there's lots and lots. And we're even having some characters make an appearance.
That's gonna be
Yes.
amazing. Yes, definitely. Those are 2 of just the best experts to hear from when it comes to coding and billing, and then how to present it to your patients too, because it doesn't just stop at billing correctly. You
No.
need to also be able to communicate with the patients. That's a very important piece of the puzzle. So that is so exciting. And then where can they, our listeners, find you on social media, email, your website? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
So you can contact me at tidewaterdentalconsulting.com. You can also find me on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I'm happy to connect, and let me know how I met you. Even if you just heard the podcast, reach out to me. I love to connect with other amazing dental professionals just like you guys.
And we're so thankful to have you here. And please stay tuned, because we will be back with a webinar to even do a deeper dive than we've done today on really the ins and outs of billing. And, we're not going to call it fraud anymore, but inappropriate billing procedures. And so we're really, really thankful that we have you in our corner as the expert to just help our offices navigate this really confusing world of coding. So thank you so much for joining us, and we cannot wait to have you back on our webinar.
Thank you so much for having me today.